Hello and welcome to Press TV's news analysis. Coming to you from Tehran, I'm Marzieh Hashemi. Well, during these very harsh economic times, do you think Americans could use an extra $15 million per day to be spent on themselves? Well, I'm sure if asked, most Americans would definitely jump at the opportunity. However, Americans have never been asked if they support giving $15 million a day to Israel, which is what they do every day. In this news analysis, we will be taking a look at the complicated and costly relationship between the United States and Israel.
In the United States, our support for Israel is bipartisan, and that is how it should stay.
U.S. President Barack Obama calling the U.S.-Israel relations unshakable at the pro-Israeli lobby known as AIPAC. But Israel is not that much loved by American officials as it seems to be. Many Americans have come to believe that the Israeli regime is becoming a burden for the U.S. At the recent G20 meeting in France, microphones which were accidentally left on picked up a private conversation between the French and U.S. presidents about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The French President Nicolas Sarkozy called Benjamin Netanyahu a liar who he could not stand, and Obama agreeing. Obama complained that he had to deal with Netanyahu every day. Some in the U.S. even describe Israel as an enemy of America. This comes as no surprise considering Israel's hostile acts against the U.S. American authorities have caught several people red-handed spying for Israel. In February, a former U.S. congressman revealed that he had been told by the FBI about uncovering a plot to murder him. James Aburrez quoted the FBI agent as further telling him that the man who intended to murder him had gone back to Israel. Aburrez also complained that the plot received, quote, perplexingly little coverage in the U.S. media. In Israel, there are also those who criticize Tel Aviv for the troubles it creates for Washington. Meir Dagan, ex-chief of Israel's intelligence apparatus, Mossad, in 2010 described Tel Aviv less of an asset for the U.S. and a burden on it. As for Israel's current schemes, many believe that Tel Aviv is bent on dragging what they see as a reluctant, war-weary U.S. into another war, this time against Iran. The U.S. gives Israel billions of dollars in military aid out of the taxpayers' pockets each year. The U.S. has waged bloody wars in the region for the sake of Israel's security. Washington has turned into a pariah in the Muslim world merely over its all-out support for the Israeli regime, which many call a cross for the U.S. to bear.
Well, I'd like to welcome my guest to the program from London, journalist and writer, Mr. Bashar Zidan.
Hello.
Welcome to the program. From Beirut, Director of Center for Middle East Studies, Mr. Hisham Jaber. And from Washington, author and historian, Mr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. Welcome all of you to the program. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, let's kick this off in London, Mr. Zidan. In your perspective, who really leads this relationship between the United States and Israel?
Well, to define this relationship, we need a close look at the numbers. The Jewish ethnic group in America is not more than 2% of the population. Yet, however, half of the America's billionaires are Jewish. The 4 CEOs of the largest Hollywood studios are Jewish, 3 CEOs of the largest TV stations, and the CEO of the New York Times. So the control over the American population in terms of mass media is highly dominated by their tools, and that's why they can always change the American decision towards the Israeli one. So it is a numbers game and money and power.
Okay, well, Mr. Jaber, why would the United States be aiding a country that doesn't need the money when its own people are really under pressure and suffering right now?
Yeah, you have to let me start a little bit and go back 50 years ago. For 50 years, that Israel is the closest allied of the United States, and people in America, the public opinion in America is well indoctrinated in this way, and they let them believe that Israel is a vital interest to the United States, and Israel is the only place civilized in this area, etc., etc. This is a matter of public opinion. It's not a matter of administration. As your guest said, the problem is not by a Jewish number in the United States. The Christian Zionists are much more close to Israel than the Jewish lobby. You find now in America other lobby than AIPAC, for example, like J Street, which start to talk with another language, trying to be fair in this relation. And this relation between United States and America, and even you are talking about budget and money, and the problem now in America, financial problem, and even though that America continue to help Israel and to pay about $4 billion officially every year as a foreign aid to Israel. And beside this, people don't know that many billions, maybe between 7 and 10 billions, go to Israel from private sectors, and this money is considered, according to the American law, as tax deductible. And who pay this money? Not necessarily Jewish wealthy people, but many Americans try to pay this money to run away from taxes and to gain the support of the Zionists and the AIPAC and the Christian Zionists in America. That's clear. For 50 years and more, United States, Israel became, heavy to the United States. Now they start to talk about it, and a state of Israel, which considered for American people as we said, as a platform to the United States overseas, even though it's another state overseas, like Hawaii, for example, would think it different, that Hawaii pay taxes to the federal government.
Let me turn to Washington, Mr. Jabber. Let me turn to Washington and get Mr. Tarpley in on this. Now, when we look at the reality on the ground, we see situations such as the U.S. sanctions against Iran, that the American business sector was actually against the sanctions because of being hurt themselves. How does Washington then go against the own interests of the people of its country and then go towards something like this, or in implementing things such as the sanctions?
I would say the relevant term is Wall Street imperialist circles. In other words, the power here in the United States is not located in Hollywood or in the Congress or even in the White House, but it's rather at that point where Wall Street interfaces with the State Department, the intelligence community, the Federal Reserve, and the Treasury. We have, after all, an invisible government. So I think we ought to see the invisible government as a kind of banking power, which is very much indifferent to commercial interests, exports, and things like this. And of course, they also play the game of world domination. A couple of voices from this permanent establishment that may be relevant. We had Netanyahu here in Washington a week ago, strutting with his pompous and bombastic speech. Israel has to be master of its own destiny. He's got to be able to defend Israel by himself at any time that he wants. This is fine, but then you're also free to bear the consequences alone. And I think we had a week ago Zbigniew Brzezinski, someone that I differ with very much on most things. Zbigniew Brzezinski has now joined my call for an ultimatum by Obama and by the administration to Israel, which he discussed with Fareed Zakaria on GPS, CNN, a week ago. And that is to say, there will be no war in the Middle East. The United States will not wage war. If Israel insists on waging war, they bear the consequences. They're on their own. Aid must be cut off. No complicity by the United States in such a war. Unfortunately, we have an administration here with Obama that is so weak and so feckless that he's incapable, for a combination of psychological and electoral political reasons, of making such a statement. Because what Netanyahu says can also be said from here. We have to be able to assert the paramount national interest of the United States, which is that there be no war. This would be a futile, ruinous exercise just as we're winding down the existing wars to be dragged into another one. It should not be allowed to happen.
Well, what about that, Mr. Z, then? Mr. Tarpley saying that there should be no war and that Israel should be given an ultimatum. How likely, though, is that to happen, given the current situation in American affairs? Now, of course, Mr. Tarpley talked about a weak President Obama. Is it a weak President Obama, or is it the system itself? Because prior to Obama, we saw Bush, and prior to him, we have seen basically the Israelis more or less getting their ways with Washington.
The problem is not in Obama himself. It's any American president who does not support the AIPAC decisions or the prime minister's, the Israeli prime minister's decision. He will have problems in elections. If you remember last year when Netanyahu addressed the American Congress, he was applauded and cheered 56 times. This doesn't happen in a circus even. But this is to prove to the presidents, and especially Obama, because Obama, when he was elected, he was promoting change and balance in the Middle East, and they made him realize that if he wants to be re-elected, he has to go their way. So the problem is not in addressing the president, but addressing, as your guest said, the Congress and the power centers in the American administration. So as for a war on Iran, the American administration are sending messages that they are not in favor of this move. But if Israel decided to go ahead with it, they will not do it without guaranteeing interference from the American administration. So the decision for this war is made in Tel Aviv, not in Washington, and Washington will only follow.
Mr. Jaber, what's your take on that? Do you agree with our guest in London that the decision to go to war will be made in Tel Aviv and not Washington?
No, really I don't agree. There is a conflict, political conflict now between America and Israel. Israel is trying for years to push United States to start military operation against Iran, even within George W. Bush era, and it didn't succeed because America, even that era in W. Bush era, did discover that any military operation against Iran, it will be catastrophic for the interest of the United States in that region, and they tried to convince Israel about it. And now they are making pressure on Obama, and especially now there is election in the United States, and Obama know very well the influence of the Jewish lobby and the Israeli prime minister within the Jewish lobby in Washington. Obama is smart enough and tried to convince them, and he says something historical, that he is, in the whole history of the United States, the best friend of the of Israel,
right,
etc., etc. But I don't think that Israel make a decision of war and give it to the United States. What we heard, that Israel did insist to convince United States that it will make military operation against Iran, but it will not surprise the government of the United States.
Okay.
In this question, be sure that America, still Israel, under the control in this issue. Not the decision is not made already in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
It's not made already. It's not made yet, and it will not be made in Tel Aviv instead of Washington.
All right. Well, Mr. Tarpley, now we've been talking about a possible attack or war on Iran, but we are currently witnessing more attacks right now by the Israelis on the Gaza Strip. And again, we're seeing the silence from the United States on this issue. How do you explain this? With the United States' continual silence in an issue such as this, really, isn't the United States just basically shooting itself in the foot and destroying its image more and more internationally?
I would say yes. This is called hypocrisy. This is called double standards. This is a bankrupt foreign policy, which, as you say, is widely discredited. But in terms of what to do, right now we have a very interesting possibility that's opened up in the Congress. We have a Republican congressman from North Carolina, Walter Jones, fairly obscure backbencher, very conservative, a right-winger. but he's done something useful, which is he has submitted a resolution to the House of Representatives which formally warns Obama, saying, if you start any other war after you started, he escalated Pakistan into a completely new war, and he's also then attacked Libya, and he's essentially running wild in the Lakes District of Africa, in the area around Uganda,
Right.
where we have so much attention. But the resolution says, Obama, if you insist on an attack, you will be impeached. Now, obviously, at this point, all eyes turn to Ron Paul, the member of the House of Representatives, the only one who's running for president, who could really put this resolution on the map, since he gets to take part in the nationwide cable television and even broadcast television debates. So what's going on right now is a campaign on the internet to force Ron Paul to get over whatever problem he has and come out forcefully, not with a throwaway line, not with lip service, but to make the purpose of his presidential campaign from now on to get this Walter Jones resolution passed, send that on to the Senate. But of course, once it's passed the House, that's enough, because that's where impeachment occurs. Ron Paul up to now seems to be more interested in his dirty deal with Romney, whereby Ron Paul would give his delegates to Romney, and Rand Paul might become, the son of the current candidate, currently a senator, might become vice president on a Romney ticket. That's not good enough. It's time to do something, if we're serious, to ward off a catastrophic war
well,
in
let's
the Middle
look at
East.
that, Mr.
I
Tarpley.
think we have voices from the establishment.
Okay, let's look at that, what you're saying. How likely would something like that happen, given the political scenario that we're talking about in the United States? Do you really think that they would be able to pass such a resolution or bill and really get it implemented at this point in time?
Well, the House of Representatives is full of reactionary Republicans, Tea Party fanatics, what have you. And they have all kinds of problems, but the one thing that they have is that they don't like Obama. And if Obama puts his name on a major war, I think there is going to be a backlash. So the time to go on record for that, however, is now. That's the benefit of the Walter Jones resolution. You can vote before the fighting starts.
All right. Well, Mr. Zidan, let's look at the opposite possible scenario. How likely is it that what we're looking at in dealing with the United States and Israeli relations is actually political game, and that, as a matter of fact, Tel Aviv is doing exactly what Washington wants it to do, but in this way, Washington's hands, the hands of the United States, is not dirtied? How do you see this as a possibility?
Well, we have to realize that America controlled the Egyptian decision for over 30 years by only 200 million a year. When giving out up to 4 billion a year, you should have some effect on the Israeli policies. But having Israel in the Middle East as their mad dog and scaring other countries by Israel is a possible scenario. But we have to keep in mind that Israel puts its interests over the American interests in all cases. So there might be a little effect by Israel, but they still know, the Americans, that Israel cannot speak to other countries mostly around them. So America has to do the talking. It might be playing good cup, bad cup with Israel, but it won't work with most of the countries.
Okay, well, let me turn to our
maybe,
other two
but
guests
not
and
with
get
the
their
Arab
reaction.
neighbors.
Let me see. Both of them seem to want to react to that. Mr. Jabber, your take on that same question.
Yes, ma'am. For a long time, the American policy in the Middle East was always convenient and to the Israeli interest, to the Israeli wishes, to the Israeli desire. But on the other hand, America has its own interest in the Middle East. There is in many, from time to time, divergence in many places between American policy in the Middle East and the Israeli policy in the Middle East. Now, the people, even in America, and even that is the Jewish lobby control the mass media, and based on the revolution of the mass media in the last 10 years, 5 years, the people in America start to ask a question: if the commitment of the United States toward Israel, that means also that United States must support any aggression of Israel, any adventure of Israel in the area. For example, this is the question start to be asked in the United States and even within the Jewish. Now the foreign policy between the two countries, there is of course many divergences. America started to think that it had to reconciliate with the people in the Middle East, not with the spoiled regime. And for example, you know, the old in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Yemen and Libya, even those regimes was kicked out even by America after the time they have been expired. Now America start to think that it has to reconcile with those people. Second, there is a divergence. American administration want a solution in the Middle East, but Israel refused and
Okay, well,
every time
let me I just have to switch over. Sorry, Mr. Jarber, I got to switch over to Washington because I'm just about out of time. Mr. Tarpley, now Mr. Jarber said more and more Americans are becoming aware. Do you really believe that the American people now are becoming a lot more aware of the realities between their country and Israel? And tell me about, do you think that they will be, if they are becoming more aware, do you see this movement growing and being able to put enough pressure to change that relationship?
Unfortunately, I would say the peace movement here in the United States is pretty much dead. Obama more or less killed it. But I think we need to look at another factor. The big thing that has changed now in the Middle East is Russia is back. 1 week ago today, Putin won an overwhelming landslide victory as president of Russia. We can already see a much firmer tone in Russian diplomacy, right? Lavrov, dealing with the Arab League, told them directly there must be no interference in the internal affairs of Syria. Attacking Syria is another way to start this war. You don't have to go directly against Iran. You can attack Syria and get it started that way. And this also has to be ruled out. I think the time may be ripe for President-elect Putin, President Putin, to assert the new presence of Russia in the Middle East with some kind of a major initiative. The one that occurs to me is, why not call a general Middle East peace conference and invite everybody to come? And if people feel threatened, let them come. If people need to be rebuilt after wars, let them come. If people want to stop new wars, let them come. And I think that's one way to deal with this, because we have Netanyahu who says there must be no negotiation with Iran, which is simply crazy. Everybody should
Mr.
negotiate
Tarpley,
with everybody else.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments, but we're out of time. I appreciate everyone being with us. Mr. Bashir Zidan in London, Mr. Hisham Jarber, Beirut, Mr. Webster Griffith Tarpley in Washington. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us. Join us here, same time, same place tomorrow for another top look at one of tomorrow's top stories. I'm Marzia Hashimi, signing out for myself and the crew here in Tehran. Thank you so much for being with us, and goodbye.